Signore e signori, buonasera, benvenuti alla casa italiana zerilli-marimò della New York University. It's a great pleasure for me tonight to have you here to share with you this special evening. There are three reasons why it's special. First of all, the organizing institution, association, the American Italian Cultural Roundtable, was already here before the casa existed, before I arrived to the casa. I remember Angela Marantino, Nancy Delicato, and many other people going to our Aldo Mancusi that we lost recently. And I have to say that I'm full of admiration for what they do and what they have done. It's very much the job I have, but I'm paid for it. And they put their energies, their time, their resources at the service of the promotion of a dialogue between Italy and America. So I'm very, very grateful personally and as an institution for the work they do. And that's why we are very happy to be able to give them a home for their initiative. And that's number one. Number two is the speaker that is speaking tonight. There's going to be an official presentation, so I'm not going into the details of his bio. But Anthony Julian Tamburri is not only the Dean of the Calandra Institute and a dear personal friend, he's a scholar that redefined what Italian-American studies are. I would really say that he's one of the founding, if not the founding figure of Italian-American studies that gave the discipline an academic dignity that didn't have before. And Anthony is the best person for that because he is an Italian-American, but he's also an accomplished scholar of Italian literature. So he not only speaks Italian, but he knows Italian culture from the inside deeply, and American culture because he was born here. So he's in a unique position to understand the peculiarities, the differences, the different shadows in the different communities. And he's also a one-man cultural organization, aside from the one he leads at the Calandra. He also has the Bordighera Press that does a remarkable job in the publication of works, both in translation and in the original language, in different fields. And it's a pleasure to collaborate with him. And I'm always learning something when I talk to him, either informally or in this context. He's never banal. He's always original. He has a way of looking at things that you did not consider before you heard him speak. So to me, that's the second great joy. And of course, the third is the film. Big Night is a great film, and any chance we have to talk about it and to be helped understanding it better, it's welcome. So now please welcome Bill Ronayne, who is the president of the American Italian Cultural Roundtable.
Okay. Thank you, Stefano. Okay, good evening, everyone. Nice big group we have here. Nice mixture. As I said, my name is Bill Ronayne, and I am the president of the American Italian Cultural Roundtable. On behalf of our organization and CASA, I welcome you to our first event for 2024 in this beautiful facility and the beginning of our 40th anniversary year. We're delighted to be back here at Casa Italiana and partnering with them to celebrate Italian culture with all of you this evening. Tonight we have another great program with a distinguished presenter, and we'll be getting to that in just a few minutes. And I want to turn things over to our latest and the newest board member, also from the Calandra Institute, Stephen J. Cerulli.
Can you hear me? Dr. Anthony Julian Tamburri is the Dean of the John D. Calandra Italian-American Institute of Queens College, City University of New York, in that order, where he is also a distinguished professor of European languages and literatures. He was born and raised in Stamford, Connecticut, which I may add is also my hometown, and received his PhD at the University of California, Berkeley, in Italian and Spanish. In 2010, the president of Italy, Giorgio Napolitano, confessed on him the motu proprio in the honor of the Cavaliere dell'Ordine al Merito della Repubblica Italiana. Tamburri is a co-founder of the Bordighera Press, as Stefano mentioned, publisher of the semi-annual Voices of Italian America, a literary and cultural review, the annual Italiana, and two book series, Via Folios and Crossings, as well as the Bordighera Poetry Prize. He has written over 100 journal articles and book chapters and 20 books. We updated that today. Someone needs to update the Wikipedia. Many which have been translated into Italian. His most recent works are Cultures are commodities, so take a look. A Politics of Self-Omission, the Italian-American Challenge in a Post-George Flourish Age. Signing, Italian-American Cinema, appropriate for this lecture, a more focused look. And The Columbus Affair, Imperatives for an Italian-American Agenda. Let's extend a warm welcome to Anthony.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you all for coming. I want to thank the American Italian Cultural Roundtable for inviting me. It's always, and I second Stefano's comments about people who do things because they love to do it. They love the topic and they go all out, and it's wonderful. It's also wonderful to be here at the Casa Italiana. I was fortunate enough to have gotten to know fairly well the Baronessa Mariuccia Zerilli-Marimò. She was a wonderful person, a wonderful human being. The spirit of her really is in this Casa Italiana, which I'm trying to be diplomatic here, but there's no way to be diplomatic, which speaks wonders compared to something up the street, way up the street. Anyway, this is a movie that I think you know, there are movies, we all like movies. I think this is one of what I would call the very smart Italian-American movies. It's really smart. And I'm this Big Night 1, 2, 3, and you'll see notions of an Italian hyphen American identity. I'm really into the hyphen. I'm a strunken white person. If you're old enough, you know what that means. You probably use strunken white in either in high school or in freshman college. So the hyphen has become a symbol for a number of things, and this is sort of a basic bibliography. And instead of presenting it in the highfalutin terminology that I've written, I'm just going to go through this a little bit to give you an idea. So this guy Daniel Aaron decides that he's going to write a little piece called The Hyphenate Writer and American Letters. And he did so in the Smith Alumni Quarterly in 1964. Think about it. Where do you go to a small women's liberal arts college to look for research on the hyphen? Well, Daniel Aaron sort of launched this notion of hyphenation, the hyphenate writer, and American Letters. And he spoke about 3 different types. And you'll notice that there's this sort of Dantesque divine trinity here. So he spoke about 3 things. He spoke about first, second, and third stage. First stage writer is the one who is very open. He called it a local colorist, but open to making sure that the dominant culture, as we call it, the mainstream society would accept that person's writing, would accept the type of stories he was telling or she was telling, and so on and so forth. And that was sort of the first stage. And, in a little bit subjective, let's say, subjected to mainstream. And then there was the second stage that, and he saw a little bit like a militant, but trying to deal with both the indigenous culture, that is Italian-American, African-American, Jewish-American. Those are the writers he was talking about. And then there was, of course, the third stage, is that was the person who felt comfortable in this mainstream society, but who can also deal with, can talk about his or her indigenous, and I want to use that word indigenous for a number of reasons. Basically, in our case, Italian-American. And then, so that was really sort of stimulating, because we never talked about that in Italian-American studies. We never talked about identity in those terms. And this is something I discovered, like back in '81. I discovered Daniel Aaron in '81 or '82. Somebody said, you should read Daniel Aaron. I said, who's Daniel Aaron? Well, later I found out he was sort of the father of American studies in this country. Then a very unknown, unfortunately, but did very important work, is a woman by the name of Rose Basile Green. And she actually, in 1969, was dividing up groups of Italian Americans, and actually she divided them into 5 groups. Right? And the same thing, from a sort of a group that's going to be very subservient in some ways to mainstream culture, to the middle groups that maybe not, let's sort of, defend our culture, whatever. And then to the person who feels comfortable being both, being hyphenated, being both, in our case, Italian-American and American, right? Other people have gone through Campisi, Fred Gardefei, Joseph Lopriato, myself. We sort of followed the same pattern. I have here Charles Sanders Peirce only because he was a turn of this 20th century philosopher who really is the father of American semiotics, which is the study of signs. And he has a tripartite structure himself in which he goes from feeling to acknowledging that there's something else out there to then what he calls analysis, right? And it plays very well with Aaron, with Gardefei, with what I did, with Rose Basili Green, etc. But there's a bit of an outlier here, and that's why, and that's what Big Night is, in this sense, an outlier as a film. And the outlier is this guy named Irvin Child, as you see in the middle, Italian or American, the second generation in conflict. He studied the Italians of New Haven, Connecticut. For those of you who don't know, New Haven, Connecticut was historically somewhere around 55 to 60% Italian. It still has a very high Italian population. And he sort of turned the notion of hyphenation that we were all working on and trying to come up with fancy new formula and so on and so forth, following this idea of being kowtowing to mainstream, to sort of being in the middle and not knowing what to do with it, maybe being a little bit militant to bring your own culture into play. And then the third being someone who feels comfortable in mainstream and can deal with his or her ethnicity. Well, he turns it on and said he found, and this is, Irvin Child was a doctoral student in social psychology at Yale University. As you know, Yale is in New Haven. And so he found that the Italian Americans of New Haven, the Italians or Italian Americans of New Haven, this is obviously before the fact, basically overturns the notions that were brought forth later by Daniel Aaron, by Lopriato, by Paul Campisi, who studied the Italian family, etc. And he found that, and this is where Big Night, it's like Stanley Tucci and Campbell Scott read Irvin Child. This is where we have here the militant first stager. And we don't see that in other, we don't see that a lot in other articulations of Italian American culture, whether it's written or whether it's filmic or on the stage and so on and so forth. That's one of the things for me, that makes Big Night the smart movie that it is, because it does turn things over in ways that we haven't seen before, right? So I wanted to, so this is sort of what we all came up with pre-discovering Irvin Child. Now, Irvin Child's book he published his dissertation as a book in 1943 with Yale University Press. And I'm assuming that, like a lot of university press books, they maybe printed about 500 copies, and they all sort of disappeared. And I found my copy in the library of the late Philip Conestraro, who was a distinguished professor at Queen City University, New York, and he was associated with the Calandra Institute. So Aaron, instead, what he does is that whole first stage you see, local colorist, pre-modernist, basically Gardefei's talking about the same thing. I stuck in Peirce because I thought it would be nice to do a little bit of a topsy-turvy myself, whatever, and then I gave it different names. But basically, we're all talking about this first generation, this first stage, whatever we want to call it, the poetic or the expressive, as I call it, as someone being a little bit subservient to the culture. But Aaron says no. And we see that, of course. We see it in Big Night. This is what Child said. He called the in-grouper, he called the apathetic, and then the rebel. So the in-grouper, as you see, strives primarily for acceptance by the Italian group, that is, by the local group, and not by mainstream. He doesn't give two hoots about mainstream. He wants his culture to be out there, right? Right? And acts in such a way as to please fellow in-groupers, Italians, rather than the gay favor with the Americans, with mainstream culture. And that's new in this notion. It's old. It's 1943, 1938 actually, when he finished his dissertation. But it's new for what we can find. And this is important here for all of those who do research, that we shouldn't always move forward only, but we need to go back and see what was done before, and to see if maybe there's something in the past that was done that could be helpful for us to take our interpretation studies forward. And this is a perfect example of it. And I had another experience years ago when I was writing my dissertation, and I was quoting all the hot shots of the theories on the novel and so on and so forth. And a friend of mine who was on a Fulbright in Italy wrote to me and said, I just heard this guy talking, giving this lecture, and he mentioned some guy named James Warren Beach. Well, James Warren Beach wrote a book in 1928, I think it was, called The Novel. And it was basically a theoretical discourse without all of that jargon that we use, I as well, that we use to talk about what we then later, in the 40s and 50s, call the anti-novel. Very important. So this idea of resurrecting new thoughts or old thoughts really allow us to look at things differently, right? And it allows us to look at. So keep this in mind. Keep this in mind. In-group is the rebel. The first stage here is the rebel. Apathetic. Apathetic means it's not pathos, emotion. It's not emotional, right? In that sense, it's not taking a side. And as you see, retreats from the conflict situation, whatever. And this, as we'll see, is one of the brothers, the other brother. And then, of course, there's a rebel reaction, which is predominant in the individual of the tendency to achieve complete acceptance by the American group. A rebel because this person is rebelling against the local culture, the original culture, his or her original culture, right? So this is the, and then we have Primo, who wants to hold on to traditional, quote unquote, traditional Italian cuisine. Now, I have here in parentheses another film. I don't know how many of you have seen Dinner Rush, but Dinner Rush is a wonderful companion piece to this film, to Big Night. Dinner Rush is about a restaurant, and it's actually filmed in the director's restaurant here in Manhattan. So Primo wants to hold on to traditional Italian cuisine. Secondo wants to, oops, that's a, sorry, wants to cook for the public, whatever. Forget Louis and Udo, that was a mistake of mine. And then Pascal wants to serve, and he serves only traditional Italian-American cuisine. And in a sense, it's sort of what Udo does in Big Night. And you'll see, we can have another conversation about Big Night. So we have Primo, Secondo, and Pascal. And of course, you know, how much paper have we written about Primo and Secondo here, right? Primo, it's a restaurant, the Primo of an Italian meal. Secondo, of the Italian meal, right? Primo, he's a little bit older, I think we assume. Secondo is, of course, the younger brother. He's called Secondo. So we have that play all within the idea of the culinary, the Primo and the Secondo, right? And then we have this guy, Pascal. Now, Pascal, it's interesting. Pascal is Corsican, we're told, or there's a reference to, very bleak reference to it. But let us be honest. Let us be Corsica. It's really Italy that was sold to the French, right? Basically it's Italian, right? So I like to have these three together as quote unquote Italians. I see them all three as Italian. Now, Here we have Italian versus Italian American, and let's look at our first clip.
Wait, the risotto? Yes, go.
Oh, thank God. Okay, here we go. Oh, I'm just so hungry.
Signore?
Oh, that looks good. You got leaves with yours.
Here we go. Okay. Yeah.
You sure? Is this what I ordered?
Yes, that is a risotto. It's a special recipe that my brother and I bring from Italy. It's delicious, I promise.
It took so long, I thought you went all the way back to Italy to get it.
Yes, I know, but it's worth it, I promise. You would like a fresh pepper or cheese?
No, I don't need cheese.
Cheese, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Cheese,
he likes
Lots
cheese.
of
Yeah.
cheese.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excuse me, didn't you say that this was going to be rice with seafood?
Yes,
Yeah.
that is, it is Italian arborio rice, the best. And then with shrimp and scallop and...
I just don't see anything that looks like a shrimp or a scallop. It's not what I expected. But I get a side order of spaghetti with this, right?
Why? Well, no.
I thought all main courses come with spaghetti.
Well, some, yes, but you see, risotto is rice, so it is the starch, and it doesn't go really with pasta.
But I don't...
Order a side of spaghetti, that's all. And I'll eat your meatballs.
Yeah, he'll have the meatballs.
Well, the spaghetti comes without meatballs.
There are no meatballs with the spaghetti?
No, sometimes spaghetti likes to be alone.
All right, then I guess we'll also have a side order of meatballs.
Meat? This is fine. Let's just eat.
All right, then no meatballs, and we'll just have a side order of spaghetti.
Primo, please, just... Come on.
I want to know for who.
Just make me the side order spaghetti, please.
Secondo, I want to know for who is it for?
For the lady with the risotto.
What?
Why? She likes starch. I don't know. Come on.
Bitch.
I'll make it myself.
Who are these people in America? I need to talk to her.
Oh, please, Primo, what are you going to do? Tell the customer what she can eat, huh? That is what she wants. That is what the customer asks for. Make it. Make the pasta. Make it. Make the pasta. Come on, let's go.
How can she want? They both are starch. Maybe I should make a mashed potato for on the other side.
Primo, look, don't, okay? Because they are the first customer to come in 2 hours. The fucking pipes
No. She's a criminal. I want to talk to her.
Talk to her? Okay. You want to talk to her? Okay, that's great. You want to talk to her? Okay, good, fine. I'm sick of this every fucking night, okay? You want to talk to her? Oh, good. Okay, here we go. Okay. Go talk to her.
No. She's a Philistine. I'm not going to talk to her. She don't understand anyway.
So this is a wonderful scene, right? Because it talks about everything. It talks about not only what we're eating, but how we're eating. And in that sense, it's also Italian, quote unquote, versus. So when I say Italian, I mean at times both Italian and Italian American versus American, right? Oh, you got leaves with your, this idea, let's be honest, if you've gone to good restaurants in this country, you've gone to quote unquote ethnic restaurants, right? Unless you go to a steakhouse. Otherwise, the classic American restaurant doesn't exist. It's a diner. It's an Applebee's. It's a pre-Applebee's, right? It's a diner and things of that sort. We've always had French cuisine, for example, and then about 30 years ago, Italy sort of nudged it aside, right? Italian cuisine nudged it aside. But we're dealing with a non-USA cuisine that not only is different as far as what's on the table, but it's different how we eat. And in many ways, from you not understanding what garish garnish is, to smoking at the table. Now, People will tell you Italians smoke at the table, or used to smoke at the table, and that's true, but they did it differently. Nobody put their cigarette out in the mashed potatoes in Italy. So that's what this scene is really about, right? That. And then the idea that, you know, risotto doesn't have big clumps, pieces of shrimp or big scallops. It's all minced, right? And it's all cooked in, and the idea of the flavor is all in one, and so on and so forth. It doesn't compute to the uninformed North American mind in some ways, right? So that's what that, and then of course we see the guy wants actually more than cheese on his pasta, he wants pasta with his cheese, it seems, that he keeps telling him to come on, and come on, right? And then the lines are just absolutely wonderful, almost lyrical, right? Sometimes spaghetti wants to be alone. I mean, think about that. That line is just classic, right? So here it is, and we're in this restaurant. The restaurant is very similar to in a city in Italy, a peripheral sort of trattoria in a way. That restaurant, the inside of that restaurant could be in any outskirts of any big city in Italy. So we have that as well. The meticulousness of Secondo, when he goes outside to move whatever little piece he's moving, the meticulousness of Primo, right? Who, the way he puts the salt on the dish just before he releases it, he liberates it from the kitchen, right? So we have all of that going on at the very beginning, and it really sets the stage for what's to come. And what we are, of course, witness to is, and I done pun intended, is Primo's primacy of Italian cuisine. And that, I would submit to you also, could very well be part of the intention of who put this film together. The play on Primo is throughout the film. We can see it throughout the film. So this is the first, right? Now, 3 minutes, 2-minute walk down the street is Pascal's Italian Grotto. What a name, right? This restaurant is Paradise, and the other one is Pascal's Grotto. Now, a grotto can be a nice place, but a grotto is also not a nice place. It cannot be, doesn't have to be a nice place. It can be a type of inferno, the grotto, right? And so we have a play with the names as well. This is the Paradise. This restaurant is called Paradise. And then Pascal's Italian Grotto, right? Okay. This was supposed to be, I always thought this was in situated in Rhode Island. I always read it that way. Maybe because I'm a quasi New Englander, and so I wanted to see Rhode Island here. But I later found out from this is filmed in New Jersey, so this is the New Jersey shore somewhere. I don't know where. So, but it makes sense. Tons of Italians in New Jersey, right? So then, whoops. So then, this is, if you remember, this is right after the conversation when Primo suggests that perhaps they should, because there's a reference about the risotto, too expensive, takes too long to cook, and so on and so forth, that maybe they should take it off the menu. And Primo says, well, yes, what is that? Well, what that accent he does? It's not a bad Italian-American accent. And he with the hot dog, right? And so on and so forth. And of course, a few F-bombs are dropped here between the brothers and whatever. So here's something else too, though, for those of you who are old enough. I don't remember risotto being on a menu in an Italian restaurant. I don't even remember it being on Giambelli's Italian restaurant in the 70s, risotto. And so I was always curious about the risotto here. We can call it a semi blooper, right? So here we are. Here's our first introduction to the grotto. Oops.
Where do you go? To see film.
Okay. So here we have here what we're seeing is a comparison between the two customers, the two groups of customers, right? Who was in the paradise? This sort of uninformed, these two uninformed diners, right? Americans, whatever, and the artist. Remember that guy we saw eating? He's the artist. He's the one who gets his food free because he's given all the paintings to the restaurant. And Primo's so happy, and Secondo's scratching his head. What are you doing? Right? And we can't pay the bills with the paintings and so on and so forth. Right? And then instead, what do we see here? Well, dressed to the nines. Dressed to the nines is an understatement, the way, right? 1. 2, that car that goes by is the brand new Cadillac that at one point the Campbell Scott character tries to have Secondo buy, right? It's a brand new Cadillac. It's a 1957 Cadillac. But look at the clientele. They're dressed to the nines. And I would also point this out. They're very waspish looking, especially that one couple, the blonde woman, tall, blonde hair, light skin, and he's tall in his tux or whatever he's wearing, and he's got light skin and is very waspish looking. Let us not lose track of that. That's a very important aspect I would submit to you right here. Okay, so we have this introduction. Then, this is from the outside, and we can see it's a minute away. It's less than a minute walk, right? And we have that brand new car. The cars are the shiny cars that are out there. And when we finally do get into the grotto, okay. So we go from this simple soundtrack in the paradise to, this jazz, whatever. It's sort of like, going from the Honeymooners to the Dick Cavett show back then. I mean, just two antipodes, things on the antipodes, right? Here's what's curious about this and significant. Secondo, we're looking at him and we're seeing from where he's coming. He's coming out of the dark. And he's coming out of the dark because basically his business is in the dark. They don't know how to negotiate. As the militant that Primo is and the businessman that Secondo wants to be, they can't negotiate what they have. So they are, idiomatically said, in the dark. They're in and he's coming out of the dark. It's one. The other thing that we notice is that in the dark, the cars there are two cars that are there with him in the dark, and they're Chevrolets. They're not Cadillacs and they're not Oldsmobiles. They're Chevrolets, right? So, and then all of a sudden he comes to the place and we finally see the inside. What do we see? First of all, everything is red. Sort of reminds us of that bar in Mean Streets. That bar was the den of iniquity. And this is sort of a culinary den of iniquity, right? The woman, she has a good voice and she does a really good job of singing badly. She's singing one of the canonical songs of Sole Mio in such a bad way, which is reflective of everything else that's bad in this restaurant. So the red is not the positive red, because red is a color that can have both positive and negative meanings, right? Symbols. It could be symbolic of both the positive and the negative. And instead, it is, and I would submit to you that it's very much negative here, the red. It reminds us of that den of iniquity. It's a den of culinary iniquity, as I said. What else? The only food we see is that big garish salad that you sometimes get as an antipasto in this type of Pascal's Italian Grotto restaurant. And if you notice, all the dishes are the same thing: spaghetti and meatballs. So we're going from risotto to spaghetti and meatballs. And this time, the spaghetti does not want to be alone. This time, the spaghetti's with the meatballs, right? And let's not lose track of what that spaghetti and meatballs really becomes here, and in many ways. It's a type of glue almost. It's almost a hub in many ways for the way people define Italian-American culture. And that's neither good nor bad, but it's there. Right, it's there, and the opening scene I showed you is where it's called into question for the first time on screen. It's called into question, deliberately called into question, when he says sometimes spaghetti wants to be alone. Right, so two totally different worlds. One very sophisticated from a culinary point of view, and the other very unsophisticated from a culinary point of view, using the adjective Italian food, right? Yet, it's all dressed up. It's all dressed up, dressed to the nines. But it's nowhere near the type of food that we might consider, quote unquote, Italian. And when I finish, I'll talk about Italian. Professor Albertini and I and another friend of ours, Rosella Rago, had a conversation a few years ago about this. Okay, so then, of course, the dinner, Louis Prima, and I'll get to Louis Prima. Louis Prima, they're going to have Louis Prima. And then there's this wonderful dinner that's put together. And the food is so good that it is literally orgasmic. Think about it. The dinner scene, when they're all there, they're moaning in ecstasy, right? And so this is a wonderful, wonderful play here of cuisine and sex. It's really interesting, eating and sex, right? So, and they're moaning. There's no other way to describe it. Okay. So then, they have the fight, you know, because the dinner's great, but then the brothers fight. They go to the beach, and we see a type of Fellini-esque scene on the beach where they're fighting, and we're waiting for what's her name, Saragina to come, but she doesn't come. Okay, that was from Fellini film. She doesn't come. Okay. So they're ruined. And we have this.
I used to play it one time.
You ruined me. Because of a woman?
Oh, please, Secondo, be serious.
Why?
Because I wanted to save you.
And then we would go with you?
Where else would you go? What I did out of respect. It's a great investment, you know, your brother. You too, of course.
You will never have my brother. He lives in a world above you. What he has and what he is rare. You are nothing.
I'm a businessman. I'm anything I need to be at any time. Tell me, what exactly are you?
Okay. You are nothing. And he says, I'm a businessman. I'm anything I have to be at any time. So that guy, Charles Sanders Peirce, I mentioned, among other things, he says that nothing is not a negation. Nothing is the absence of something. So that in this exchange here, when he says you are nothing, he means one thing. But Pascal's answer, I'm anything I have to be, I'm a businessman, I'm anything I have to be at any time, is what Charles Sanders Peirce goes on to say, that nothing means no specific thing. It becomes then the realm of possibilities. And in that sense, Pascal is nothing. But his name also talks about having to be what he needs to be at any moment. Because Pascal comes from Pasqua. And Pasqua is, we notice, we would say Easter. It's rebirth. Pasqua is rebirth. He's Pascal, right? So he has given birth a second time to a cuisine that for a businessman is good. For a gourmet, it's not good. But he's making money. He's a businessman, right? And so he basically ruins the restaurant because he wants Primo, because he recognizes how important Primo is as a cook and as a businessman, what he could do with Primo. Because he has all the glitter and gold. He just doesn't have that substance in the middle. And Primo becomes, again, primacy, becomes the prime content of this vessel that really is empty, if we think of that from a culinary point of view, right? The one character missing but talked about is Louis Prima. And why is Louis Prima important? Because Louis Prima did what neither Primo and Secondo nor Pascal are doing from a culinary point of view. Primo and Secondo are not having financial success. They got a great kitchen, obviously, with Primo, but not having financial success. Pascal is having financial success with spaghetti and meatballs and those Garris salad, but he knows he can do better. And he wants, obviously, to do better. You know, it's seemingly insignificant that he's there playing the piano, but it's not insignificant because one, he defined himself, as I said, but second, he's also giving sending off a mess. I used to play, you know. And he's clearly having fun. He's enjoying himself playing. But he gave it up for some reason. He gave it up, right? We don't know why, but we can assume. And so it has significance to him playing, because it represents something that he gave up. Louis Prima represents the Italian-American who is able to take his Italian-American culture and sort of mainstream culture, that is jazz, and bring them together. And just think of all the clips you could see on YouTube of when Louis Prima and Keely Smith and the Witnesses were on, for example, the Ed Sullivan Show, and so on and so forth. They would go from joking around, then the proverbial zuma, 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 right, to a point where those four musicians, including Louis Prima, who's a trumpet player, those 4 or 5 musicians would go into a jazz fit of sorts that was second to none. And they were able to bring those two cultures together. That is, the Italian-American, the Zuma, 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 the Angelina, and so on and so forth, and then bring also that jazz. And there's one point where they're improvising as jazz players do, Louis Prima's improvising, etc. And at one point he says to Sam Butera, who was a world-class saxophonist, "What's the matter, Sam? You can't play in Italian?" And then he goes into this wonderful improvisation of saxophone music that is just second to none. So Louis Prima makes sense being mentioned, and he doesn't show. He doesn't show because these guys haven't gotten there, neither Pascal nor Primo and Secondo. And with that, I'll say grazie. Any questions, observations, objections? Yeah.
At that time, I'm assuming it's like
56.
Most of the restaurants, Italian and otherwise, were totally red and all that type of, you know, red and gold or red and black, or, you know, that was the whole look then, you know, and the things started to get more modernized. So it was, and the other restaurant was just plain, nothing. It looked like a diner almost, you know.
But the other, and that's the issue, right? That the paradise is very familiar to the Italian eye. So that's very much the insides of an Italian, what we would call a trattoria, an Italian restaurant, mid-level Italian restaurant, nothing upscale, right? Whereas Pascal wants to be upscale, and we see he's upscale in many ways, but you know, his music with dinner, his singer stinks, right? She is out of tune. And so that restaurant is out of tune, both literally and figuratively. Yeah. But think about, you know, think about here in New York in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. So the most famous restaurant was Giambelli's, basically. That was, you know, before we had Le Cirque and before we had whatever else is out there, Il Gattopardo and so on, all these high-end restaurants. Basically, Giambelli's was the high-end restaurant. There were other restaurants not as famous. Yeah, there were other restaurants not as famous, but Giambelli sort of, right, had, huh? Barbetta's been here since 1896, yeah. So, but as far as this type of chic restaurant, whatever, right? And then you had, of course, the popular restaurant, which was called Mama Leone's, right? That people drove from afar. People drove from Connecticut to go to Mama Leone's. I always wondered, but people did. So you had those two restaurants, you know, and I think, in a way, the Giambelli's was a successful paradise, and the Mama Leone's was what's his name. So, yeah, and I remember, you know, as a child coming down to one or two restaurants that I'd never heard of afterwards when I tried to find whatever. People didn't know about them, but they were pretty slick restaurants too. The maitre d' had a tuxedo and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Anthony, the notion of authenticity is a key one, right?
Yes.
And what is authentic Italian American?
Yeah.
And I witnessed in my own personal life a sort of transition. So when I first got here, they were starting to have the new generation, of Italian restaurants.
Yeah.
With owners that just came from Italy. They normally brought their cook, their chef with themselves, and they were sort of pushing that notion of we do the authentic Italian cuisine. And then I remember in the mid-90s, I was here in New York, and with a group of Italian grad students in this department, we were desperately looking for an Italian-American restaurant. We wanted to experience the spaghetti with meatballs and all the rest. And we found one. But it was an adventure. So there was this shift that there was the Italian-Americans looking for authenticity of Italian cuisine, and we coming from Italy, that arriving here, we wanted an authentic Italian-American restaurant.
It's true.
Is it only my experience, or is there some sort of shift in the notion of authenticity? What is authentic?
And you know, when people say spaghetti meatballs is only an American thing, it really isn't. Although, you know, because in Rome, there's a famous restaurant called Flavio ve l'avevo detto. It's in the Testaccio of Rome. And they're famous for their polpette. Now, they're different, you know, than the regular sort of meatball, but it's a polpetta, it's a meatball, you know. So, yeah. And you know, in another cinema film, in The Godfather, when they go and have that meeting in a restaurant, it's Lewis's Italian-American restaurant. There's a neon sign that says, and it always tickled me that it's an Italian-American restaurant. Yeah.
Any more questions?
Yeah.
Lou?
I won't need it.
No, you need it because they're recording. Yeah.
For those of us who were blessed to grow up in the home of an immigrant Italian grandmother or nearby, we ate wonderfully in our homes. But the interesting thing is that we rarely, if ever, went out to eat. And whenever there was a special occasion, my grandfather said, we eat Chinese.
So
never went to an Italian restaurant because Grandma, if we did, would say, mine is better.
And you know, so I had an experience in the 70s, late 70s. So I was in California. I was doing my PhD in California at Berkeley, and so I was coming. My mother was living in Stanford, so I was coming for a week or so to visit, and I was going to meet a friend of mine here in Manhattan, and I said, okay, we'll meet at Giambelli's on 37th and Madison, because they had two places. They had Giambelli 50th, which was, you know, and then they had this little, what we would call maybe a bistro, whatever. And I remember, you know, that was also very popular, was the lunch menu and the dinner menu. Prices were different. And I grew up eating basically broccoli di rapa. We ate it like 4 times a week, you know. And we would say, again, you know, and also pasta fagioli, again, you know. And I remember going in there and so we, you know, I was in, and I looked at the menu and I saw pasta fagioli for lunch menu, 1978, $9.95. I was scandalized. Thought I was being, you know, it was highway robbery. But that's when I realized, uh-oh, somebody's taking this peasant food and they're making money off of it. Yeah. Yeah, and the same thing with broccoli di rapa. It was, it was something we ate 3-4 times a week. Now it's a $16, $17 side dish. Right? Yeah. Somebody else had their hand up.
Quickly, your presentation involving time periods with particular points representing possible issues of assimilation. When you talked about the 40s and the 50s and the anti-novel,
yeah,
all I could think of was the segue into what became the black leather jacket, the underachieving ethnic,
sure,
and the swarthy group within the Italian-American, so to speak, diaspora. And what might be in the present, I hate to say it, but the likelihood of a permanent underclass.
Of a what?
Permanent underclass.
Yeah. So that's a really good, neat observation, because I think what has been lost by quote-unquote successful Italian Americans is that we were those things. And this never came out more than when we did a symposium. It wasn't a symposium, it was a lecture. One person came and gave a lecture on Guido culture back in 2010 when Jersey Shore hit. And there, whether people like it or not, there's a subculture to there are subcultures to Italian America, as there are subcultures to Latin America, to everybody. And we got beat up before that event, big time. We got beat up to the point where we were physically threatened. And so at that event, we had two CUNY policemen at that who were armed. The good thing was we'd never had this many people. We couldn't even hold them. We had about 100 people at Calandra. We had finally made a fairly decent-sized room, but half the size of this. People were hanging in the doors. We had only doors. We didn't have these big doors we have now at the end. And I must say, many of the middle-aged men in their gray flannel suits changed their minds. And it was good to see. The lecture was by Donald Tricarico, who's a professor of sociology and has been studying Italian American youth culture since he did his dissertation. And he's part of the CUNY system. And because Jersey Shore was happening, we wanted to have someone talk about youth culture. And Donald, he said, the only time I can do this is at 10 o'clock in the morning. We said, okay, whatever. We figured we hoped we got 15 people, we'd be happy. We got over 100 people. But like I said, we got beat up. We got beat up on the internet. And one of the people who was the most clamorous against us, later that after, because we streamed it, it was the beginning of stream, we streamed it live. We had another 100 people watching it, streaming, called me up and said, Dean Tamburri, hi, I just wanted to say, I liked what I saw. I liked what I saw. I go, oh. May I ask you to say that on the circuit that well, no, I liked what I saw. Totally ignored what I said, right? I liked what I saw. So we need to make sure that we show all sides. I just spoke to one of those national groups, and I said, you can't do it alone. You need the scholars, whether they're independent scholars or scholars in the academic community, for a variety of reasons. And you just can't do it alone. We need to do it together. So I don't know if that will, if that will have any effect. I mean, I've been saying that for many years. It's easy to be in our world. the one I'm in, and to say, forget about it. Why do I have to do, you know, forget, let me just go write my article on whatever. But, you know, if you're into any of the hyphenated cultures, I think then you have an obligation. There's a certain, as we would say in Italian, impegno. You know, the French would say engagé. There's a certain impegno. We don't have it in there. We have committed. Committed doesn't mean anything. But impegno means that you are, with a small p, politically involved, that you want to make change. And I think that's what we need to do among ourselves as Italian Americans. You know, there are 88 million Italian descendants in the world. And Italy, unfortunately, although it's opening its eyes now, hasn't really taken advantage of that. Think about it, that's a wonderful resource, 88 million, right? So, which means that there's a variety of articulations of being Italian hyphen whatever, Italian hyphen American, Italian hyphen Canadian, Italian hyphen Argentinian, Italian hyphen Sao Paulo, Brazilian, right? Yeah. But we run the risk of being classified as only. Here's what I give a lecture on Italians in media occasionally. And I end with a bunch of images. And one, of course, is Tony Soprano and his family. And the other is Everybody Loves Raymond. And I say, which one do you think is more harmful? And everyone says The Sopranos. So I'm going to say to you that maybe it's Everybody Loves Raymond. Think about that family. The mother and father are, the mother's hysterical, played by Doris, I forget her name. The father's a boob. The son is a civil servant, duh, he says all the time. The Ray character is henpecked. The only saving grace is his wife, who's Irish. Think about it. Think about the image of that family, right? So we need to be careful about what we like in ways and what we don't like, you know. And there's nothing wrong with, you know, look, Happy Days. We can't blame anyone outside the Italian American community for Happy Days. Happy Days was made, produced, written, etc. by Gary Marshall, Italian American. Yeah.
So the author of Happy Days was Italian American? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, Marshall. Mascariello or something like that.
The Italian character in the series is Fonzie, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then what did he do after? He took his sister and he made Laverne and Shirley. And they're two working class women, right? And she was Italian and she's Italian, yeah. And they are quote unquote little hussies, right? Right, as they would say back then. They would call them hussies.
And Gary Marshall was from the Bronx.
And Gary Marshall, right. And so Penny Marshall, who then in her own right becomes a director, is, Italian American, you know. And then it's the question of, so then, you know, can we say their films are Italian American? And it's a very important question. And you need to sort of look at certain things. Here's what there are two films that are not about Italian Americans, but that you can make an argument sort of fall into the general category. So the new Hollywood is, of course, Francis Ford Coppola and Martin Scorsese. But then there's this other guy named Brian De Palma, and there's a fourth guy named Michael Cimino. These four constitute very much the new Hollywood. Where does De Primo come in? De Primo makes, De Palma, I mean, De Primo, I'm thinking of the poet. Where does Brian De Palma come in? Brian makes the movie that's the beginning of sort of a new type of genre, the slasher, Carrie. He makes Carrie. And here's the thing. What is Carrie about? Part of it is about someone who is fanatically religious. I'm just going to throw that out there. Okay. Now, what about Cimino? What did Cimino do? Cimino made Deer Hunter, 1978. We're 5 years out of Vietnam, and he made Deer Hunter. It's the beginning of the show. Everyone talks about Oliver Stone for the Deer Hunter, for the Vietnam movies. 1978. But here's the other thing. Take away those Slavic, Western Pennsylvanian Slavic names and stick in an Italian name, and the movie works. Because there are those values that people say, oh, Italian American values. There are also other ethnic values, right? That and there overlap. And so here we have these. So if you, the argument for me for Cimino is pretty easy. For me, it's an Italian American movie, even though the names aren't Italian American. A little bit harder for De Palma, but still, we need to understand that these are Italian Americans who have made movies that gave birth to genres, right? You know, Coppola. Now, here, this is going to be really sacrilegious to those who love The Godfather. Coppola's derivative. How's that? Coppola's derivative. It's a beautiful movie. It's one of the best we've ever seen in America, in American cinema. But it's derivative in some ways, right? Goes back to Scarface and Little Caesar, you know. I mean, I say that tongue-in-cheek, obviously, right? But that's to underscore the originality of a De Palma and of a whatchamacallit, Cimino.
Thanks. First of all, I want to say, Anthony, you did a great job. You really did.
This is family.
The second thing I want to say is that if you haven't seen this movie, watch it. Really watch it.
Yeah.
I have two more things to say. When I was back in high school, the only thing I remember is everybody wanted to be Italian. They thought that Italian men were lovers. They really did. Now, let's look at the movie for a second. I want to take a different twist on this movie. We have two brothers, right? One, to me, is conservative, and the other one wants to be an American Italian. Yeah. He looks at that other guy's restaurant, and that's what he wants to be. He wants the Cadillac. He wants the girls. He wants the money. But the other brother, he believes in his heart that if I make good food, people are going to come here. So that was a twist that I really saw there. It was quite interesting to see two different brothers in two different places. Yeah. But that's really one of the things I got out of it.
Yeah. And that's the conflict, right? You want a really good food, but can you sell it? Because there's that one point where he says, we don't tell people what they want to eat. Yep. At the beginning, make it, right? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And then there was John Travolta, and I can't think where he was dancing.
Saturday Night Fever.
I mean, and then that's, like, I'm saying that because that's what she was saying about the leather and all that. But to me, it didn't take away from, I mean, he is Italian American also, it didn't take away from an Italian person or Italian American person.
No, not like a Fonzarelli character would, right? Because what Sal was saying, that when he was in high school, everyone liked Italian. Everyone wanted to be Italian American men because they were quote unquote lovers, etc. Fonzie's a womanizer. You know, he's a womanizer. Think about it. He's a womanizer. You know, it's the stereotype. It's the stereotype of the Italian male, right? Pardon?
It's true.
Yeah. So.
Okay, well, we have one more round of applause for